Hi everybody, it's me, Miss Erin, the librarian. Today I'm your favorite witch. I'm going to read you one of my favorite Halloween stories, The Widow's Broom. This is by Chris Van Allsburg. Now you may know some of his other stories like Jumanji, but this is a classic story about a witch, The Widow's Broom. Witches' brooms don't last forever. They grow old, and even the best of them one day lose the power of flight. Fortunately, this does not happen in an instant. A witch can feel the strength slowly leaving her broom. The sudden bursts of energy that once carried her quickly into the sky become weak. Longer and longer running starts are needed for takeoff. Speedy brooms that in their youth outraced hawks are passed by slow flying geese. When these things happen, a witch knows it's time to put her old broom aside and have a new one made. On very rare occasions, however, a broom can lose its power without warning and fall with its passenger to the earth below, which is just what happened one cold autumn night many years ago. Out of a moonlit sky, a dark, cloaked figure came spinning to the ground. The witch, along with her tired broom, landed beside a small white farmhouse, the home of a lonely widow named Mina Shaw. At daybreak, Widow Shaw discovered the witch lying in her vegetable garden. You can see her hand right there. She was bruised and bloody and couldn't stand up on her own. In spite of her fear, and because she was a kind woman, Mina Shaw helped the witch inside and put her to bed. The witch asked Mina Shaw to draw the curtains, then wrapped herself tightly in the black cape and fell soundly asleep. She lay there perfectly still all day and all evening. When she finally awoke at midnight, her wounds had completely healed. She rose from the bed silently and moved silently through the widow's house. Mina Shaw was asleep in a chair by the fireplace, where embers of a dying fire glowed on the hearth. The witch knelt and took one of the red-hot coals in her hand. Outside, she made a fire of leaves and twigs, then dropped a strand of her hair into the flame. The fire hissed and crackled, burning with a brilliant blue light. Before long, the witch could see a dark form flying overhead. It was another witch who circled slowly and landed beside the fire. The two women spoke briefly, the first witch gesturing toward the garden where her old broom rested. Then they sat side by side on the second witch's broom and flew off over the treetops. Here's our witch. When Mina Shaw woke, she wasn't surprised to find that her guest had gone. Witches, she knew, had unusual powers. It didn't surprise her either when she saw that the old broom had been left behind. The widow guessed it had lost its magic. It was an ordinary broom now, just like the one she kept in her kitchen. She began using it around the house and found that it was no better or worse than brooms she'd used before. But one morning, Mina Shaw was still in bed when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen. She peeked in and saw something that made her heart jump. There was the broom sweeping the floor all by itself. It stopped for a moment and turned to the widow and then went back to work. At first, Mina was frightened, but the broom seemed harmless, and what's more, it was doing a very good job. Unfortunately, it swept all day long, In the evening, to get some peace, she locked the broom in a closet. But when it tapped on the door for more than an hour, Mina felt guilty and let it out. As she lay in bed listening to the broom sweeping each room over and over, she wondered if it could learn other things. In the morning, she led the broom outside and found out it was a very good student. She needed to show it how to do something only once. Soon the broom could chop wood and fetch water and feed the chickens and bring the cow into the front pasture. It could even pick out simple tunes on the piano. Here it is, feeding the chickens. Not a week passed before the widow's neighbors, the Spivies, that happens to be my last name, found out about the broom. Their farm was just down the road and the only other place around. It was one of the 8 Spivey children who first saw the broom. When the boy told his father, here it is, chopping wood. See the little boy? Mr. Spivey ran straight across the road to the widow's house. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did she really have such a broom?" "Oh, yes," Mina Shaw answered. "It's wonderful." She told her neighbor all about the broom and the witch who'd left it behind. Then she took him around to the back of the house where the broom had been hard at work splitting wood. Mr. Spivey was horrified. "This is a wicked, wicked thing," he said. "This is the devil." The broom stopped working and, still clutching the axe, hopped toward the widow and her neighbor. Mr. Spivey, red-faced with anger, quickly turned and hurried home. Soon, more distant neighbors heard about the broom and visited the widow's farm. The men who saw it seemed to agree it was a wicked thing. But the wives pointed out that it was a great help to the widow and could play the piano well, considering that it just struck one note at a time. No one's feelings were as strong as Mr. Spivey's. "It's evil and it's dangerous," he told everyone who would listen. "We'll all be sorry if it stays among us." As days went by, the broom seemed as innocent and hard-working as ever. Though it had learned how to do many things, sweeping brought it special pleasure. It was, after all, a broom. Occasionally, when there was nothing left to do around the widow's house, it would hop down to the road that separated Mina Shaw's from the Spivey's farm. The road was dirt, of course, and the broom could amuse itself there for hours. One afternoon, 2 of the Spivey boys and their dog walked along the road where the broom was happily at work. When they saw what it was doing, they kicked small stones the broom had swept aside its path. The broom ignored them and shuffled off to sweep another part of the road. But the Spivey boys would not leave it alone. They called the broom names, and when it continued to ignore them, they picked up a couple sticks and started tapping the broom's handle. Finally, it stopped sweeping. The broom turned to the 2 boys and knocked them both on their heads so hard they fell to the ground in tears. The broom hopped off, but the Spivey dog ran after it, yapping and biting at its bristles. "Get him!" the boys yelled. The little dog leaped into the air and caught the broom by the handle, but he was not there for long. What do you think happened? Here he is. He caught it, and there he goes. You shouldn't mess with magic. That evening, Mr. Spivey drove his wagon up to the widow's house. He was not alone. 3 men from neighboring farms were in the wagon, along with a long wooden stake and coils of rope. Mr. Spivey knocked loudly, and when she opened the door, Mina was frightened by what she saw. What do you think they planned to do? "We've come for the broom," her neighbor told her. "It's beaten my sons and likely done worse to my dog." The poor animal was nowhere to be found. The widow could tell by their faces that the men would not be leaving without her broom. There was nothing she could do to stop them. For a moment she stood silently, then answered, "Of course, you are right. If it could do such a thing, we must get rid of it." She led the men into her kitchen. "It sleeps in here," she said, pointing to a closet. "If you move it carefully, it will not wake up." The men knew how strong the broom was and hoped the widow was right. They opened the closet doors, revealing the sleeping broom. One of the farmers took it out and gently held it against the stake while the others wrapped it in yards of rope. They carried the broom outside and drove the stake into the ground and gathered straw around it. Mr. Spivey lit the fire. In no time, the flames had turned the broom to ashes. Life soon returned to normal on the Windows farm. The Spiveys even found their dog, healthy but hungry, caught in the branches of a spruce tree. Then one morning, Mina Shaw called on her neighbors with frightening news. She had seen the ghost of the broom. It was as white as snow and moved through the woods at night carrying an axe. Mr. Spivey did not believe her. But that night, under a full moon, he watched from a window as the broom's white ghost came out of the woods and slowly circled his house. The next night it returned, circling even closer. And the night after that, it came again, tapping the axe lightly on the Spivey's doors. Here is the ghost of the broom. And there is the Spivey's house. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Spivey packed their dearest possessions and their 8 children into a wagon. Mr. Spivey tried to convince the widow to leave with them, but she chose to stay behind on her little farmhouse. She went down the road as the wagon pulled away and waved goodbye to her neighbors. "You're a brave woman," Mr. Spivey called out. That evening, the widow fell asleep in the chair by the fire. She'd been listening to music. Simple tunes played one note at a time on the piano. A gentle tap woke her as it poked her shoulder. She looked up and smiled at the broom. No ghost at all, but still covered in a white coat of paint she'd given it. "You play so nicely," said Mina Shaw. The broom bowed, put a log on the fire, and played another tune. What do you think of this story? I always enjoy it. I think it's very clever how she was able to manage to trick her neighbors. Clearly this broom meant nobody any harm, but defended itself when provoked. So, this Halloween and every full moon, make sure not to mess with magic, lest you get haunted by the ghost of the broom. Happy Halloween. See you next time.